The clinic rep slid a sleek tablet across the white tablecloth. I watched him open a presentation deck I never sent. My heart thumped hard, but I kept my face calm. On page 2, I spotted the tiny typo in the NDA footer, the exact trap I had planted 3 weeks ago. My daughters sat beside me, smiling like they'd already won the lottery. Both wore designer dresses I'd never seen before. The rep cleared his throat and said, "About the $500,000 finder's fee you mentioned." I sipped my water slowly. My name is Martha Kane, and I'm 63 years old. For 14 years, I worked in a garage laboratory developing a blood test that could save thousands of lives. I filed the patents myself. I built the assay from scratch. And my own daughters just tried to sell my life's work out from under me. But they had no idea what I knew. They didn't know about the decoy files. They didn't know about the tracking codes. They didn't know I'd been 10 steps ahead of them since the day I found their first email. The rep kept talking, but I was already planning my next move. 14 years earlier, I retired from the hospital with a dream and a tiny pension. Most people my age bought boats or joined book clubs. I cleared out my garage, installed lab benches, and started working on an idea I'd sketched on napkins for 20 years. The assay was simple in theory: detect a rare protein marker that showed up months before certain diseases became visible. But making it stable and accurate took everything I had. I worked alone mostly at night, running tests until my eyes burned. I filed a provisional patent myself using online templates. I formed a tiny LLC called Kane Diagnostics that nobody noticed. I kept my raw data on a computer that never touched the internet. My notebooks lived in a fireproof box under my workbench. I didn't tell many people what I was doing. My daughters knew I was tinkering with science stuff in the garage, but they never asked for details. They were busy with their own lives, their own families, their own problems. I didn't need applause back then. I needed results. And slowly, carefully, I got them. Everything changed after my fall. It was stupid, really. I slipped on the back steps carrying groceries, twisted my ankle, and couldn't drive for 2 weeks. My daughters swooped in like rescue helicopters. "Mom, you can't live like this," my oldest daughter Valerie said, unpacking my kitchen. "Let us help you manage things." Her sister Danica nodded, already opening my laptop. "We'll handle your emails, pay your bills, keep your calendar organized." It sounded like love. It felt like relief. I was tired and hurt, and grateful someone cared. So I gave them my passwords, my login codes, my access to everything. They promised to make my life easier. For a few weeks, it worked beautifully. Bills got paid on time. My inbox stayed clean. Appointments appeared on my calendar like magic. But then I started noticing small things. Files moved in my shared drive. Calendar invites I didn't recognize. Emails marked as read that I never opened. I told myself I was being paranoid. These were my daughters. They loved me. They were helping. I was so wrong. The calendar notification popped up on my phone one Tuesday morning. Dinner meeting, Pinecrest Clinics, 7 p.m. Thursday. I stared at it, confused. I hadn't scheduled any meetings with Pinecrest Clinics. I opened the full invitation. Attached was a term sheet draft with fancy letterhead. My eyes caught on one line: $500,000 finder's fee payable at signing to Kane Diagnostics representatives. My blood went cold. I clicked through the attachments. There was a presentation deck with my data, my charts, my years of work, packaged up like a product ready to sell. The file's metadata showed it had been edited from my own computer account at midnight last Tuesday. I hadn't been awake at midnight last Tuesday. I sat very still in my kitchen, staring at the screen. My daughters had my passwords. My daughters had access to everything. And apparently, my daughters had plans. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I walked out to my garage laboratory and watched one of my test vials settle under the microscope light. The cells looked calm and organized, following their simple rules. I decided to follow my own rules. And rule 1 was, document everything. I spent the next 6 hours checking my backup logs. Every file access on my system got recorded with a timestamp and IP address. The records didn't lie. Someone had accessed my research files from my laptop while it was locked overnight, except my laptop tracks failed login attempts, and there weren't any. That meant someone knew my password and had physical access to my computer. Someone who lived in my house or had keys to it. I checked the presentation deck more carefully. It was good, professionally formatted, clear explanations of my work, impressive projected revenue numbers. They'd even included a timeline for clinical trials that actually made sense. My daughters had done their homework. This wasn't a sloppy attempt. This was planned. I felt something cold settle into my chest. Not anger yet. Something sharper and more focused. I'd spent my whole career as a medical technician diagnosing problems. You don't get emotional about test results. You just read them and respond appropriately. The diagnosis was clear. Betrayal. The treatment plan needed to be just as clear. I backed up everything to a secure drive they didn't know about. Then I started building my trap. I created a decoy dataset, a mirror copy of my real research with one critical difference. I introduced a small, impossible error into the baseline measurements. Any scientist looking closely would spot it immediately as fake data. But it was subtle enough that someone just trying to sell it quickly might miss it. I made 2 versions of the presentation deck. Each had a different tiny typo in the NDA footer. One had confidential spelled wrong. The other had a misplaced comma. I saved both in my shared folder where my daughters could find them. I didn't label them. I didn't explain them. I just waited to see which version would show up at this mysterious dinner meeting. Then I called someone I should have called years ago, a lawyer named Molly Keating who specialized in intellectual property and family disputes. Her office was downtown, and her reputation was fierce. "You need to protect this immediately," she said after I explained everything. "If your name is on that patent, we can make sure it stays yours." By the end of the day, we had a plan. And I felt ready for whatever came next. Molly moved fast. Within 48 hours, she'd restructured everything. My patent applications, my code, my trademarks, all moved into a living trust with special triggers built in. "If anyone except you tries to transfer the intellectual property rights," she explained, "the trust automatically freezes. Everything locks down until we sort it out in court." The trust document was 20 pages of legal language I barely understood. But I understood the most important part. My work was finally protected from everyone, including my own family. I signed the papers in her office, my hand shaking just slightly.
She didn't comment on it.
She just handed me copies in a leather folder and said, "Now we wait for them to make their move." That afternoon, I went home and acted completely normal. I made dinner. I watched television. I answered my daughter's cheerful text messages about "How are you feeling, Mom?" with little heart emojis. Inside, I was counting down. The dinner meeting was in 5 days. I had 5 days to prepare for the confrontation I'd been avoiding my whole life. Being a good mother, I'd learned, sometimes meant letting your children fail. And learn. I sent an email to both daughters on Monday morning. It was friendly and casual. "Thanks so much for helping me with my computer and calendar. I'm feeling much better now, and I don't want to burden you anymore. I've changed my passwords and set up some new security. You know how these tech companies are always warning about hackers. Love you both." I hit send and waited. Valerie called within an hour. "Mom, you don't need to change everything. We were just trying to help. What if you get locked out?" I wrote everything down in a safe place. I lied smoothly. "Don't worry about me." Danica texted me 3 times asking for the new passwords, just in case of emergency. I ignored the messages. Then I went into my shared drive and changed every single permission to read only. They could see my files, but they couldn't edit or copy them anymore. That night, I sat in my garage with a cup of tea and felt something like peace. My laboratory was exactly as I'd left it. My notebooks were in order. My equipment hummed quietly in the corner. For the first time in months, the space felt like mine again. Whatever happened at that dinner, I'd be walking in with my eyes open. I chose the restaurant carefully, a place called Bellamy's with private dining rooms and velvet booths. Nice enough for business, small enough that voices would carry if anyone got loud. I confirmed the reservation with Pinecrest's general counsel, a man named Todd Brennan. He sounded professional and slightly bored on the phone, like this was just another contract negotiation. He had no idea what he was walking into. I invited Molly to come but sit at the bar, out of sight. Only join us if I signal you, I told her. I want to see how far they'll go first. The day of the dinner, I put on my best blue blouse, the same one I'd worn to my medical board certification exam 30 years ago. It felt like armor. I arrived early and waited in the private room, watching the door. My heart beat steadily. I wasn't scared. I was ready. Valerie and Danica arrived together, both dressed up and carrying the same confident energy. They hugged me, asked how I was feeling, and settled into their seats like this was a celebration. Then Todd Brennan walked in, and the show began. Todd shook hands with everyone and opened his leather portfolio. Miss Kane, I'm excited to discuss your research. Your daughters sent over some impressive materials. He slid the tablet toward me. I recognized the presentation immediately. It was the version with the misspelled confidential in the footer. That meant Valerie had been the one to send it. I filed that information away. Danica jumped in, her voice bright and professional. We've been helping Mom organize everything. The clinical applications are really remarkable. I stayed quiet, letting them pitch. They'd clearly rehearsed this. They walked Todd through every slide, my methodology, my results, the market potential. They knew the material better than I expected. Todd nodded along, asking smart questions. But then he zoomed in on one of my baseline charts, and his expression shifted. He tapped the screen, frowning. What's this drift pattern here? He asked, pointing to the data point that shouldn't exist, my planted error. The room went very quiet. I took a slow breath and leaned forward. That's a good question, I said calmly. Because that exact drift only appears in stolen copies of my research. I reached into my bag and pulled out my own printed presentation deck, the real one, with clean data and a complete chain of custody documentation. I placed it on the table next to the tablet like I was laying down evidence in court. I created that error 3 weeks ago as a tracking device, I said. I wanted to know if anyone was accessing my files without permission. Valerie's face went pale. Danica froze, her mouth slightly open. Todd Brennan looked from the tablet to my printed pages, his lawyer brain clearly working overtime. MS. Kane, are you saying this data was obtained improperly? Yes, I said. My daughters had access to my computer to help me with basic tasks. They were never authorized to negotiate deals on my behalf. I pulled out the trust document Molly had prepared. As of last week, all intellectual property rights are held in a protected trust. Any transfer requires my explicit written consent. Molly appeared from the bar area, like she'd been waiting for her cue.
She was.
I'm Miss Kane's attorney, she said, placing her business card on the table. We'll need a written statement from Pinecrest confirming how this data reached you. Todd closed his portfolio immediately. We won't be proceeding tonight. The ride home was silent. My daughters didn't follow me. Molly did, just to make sure I got inside safely. You did well, she said at my door. Now comes the hard part. She was right. By morning, the consequences started landing. The escrow account my daughters had opened, using my company's name without my permission, got frozen by the bank after Molly sent them the trust documents. A formal cease and desist letter went to both Valerie and Danica with a subject line, unauthorized solicitation regarding Kane Diagnostics intellectual property. My phone stayed silent until noon. Then the messages started flooding in. Long paragraphs of explanation from Valerie. Angry accusations from Danica. Voicemails that swung between apologetic and defensive. I read them all. I didn't respond to any. That afternoon, I made soup in my kitchen, watching the pot simmer while my whole world rearranged itself. My daughters had tried to sell my life's work without asking me. That was the fact. Everything else was just noise. I ate dinner alone, staring at my garage laboratory through the window. Tomorrow, I'd start making real plans for my research the right way. We finally sat down together 4 days later. My kitchen table felt too small for the tension filling the room. Valerie and Danica sat across from me, both looking exhausted and defensive. You weren't doing anything with it, Valerie said, her voice tight. It was just sitting in your garage. We thought. You thought you'd cash in, I interrupted quietly. We were trying to help the family, Danica cut in. You're not getting any younger, Mom. What happens to all that work when you're gone? The words landed like slaps. I took a breath, keeping my voice level. You don't get to decide what happens to my work, I said. You especially don't get to sell it behind my back and call it protection. Valerie's eyes filled with tears. We just wanted. I know what you wanted, I said. $500,000. Split between you, probably. Maybe you thought I'd never find out. The silence stretched out, heavy and uncomfortable. Finally, Danica spoke, her voice small. What happens now? I looked at both of them, my daughters who I'd raised and loved and apparently failed to teach about boundaries. Now you leave my work alone. And I do what I should have done years ago. The next morning, I opened an old email folder I hadn't looked at in months. Inside were careful, respectful messages from a company called North Bay Biosolutions. They'd been reaching out for almost a year, asking about my research, never pushing. I'd ignored them because I wasn't ready. I was too protective, too uncertain, too scared of what commercialization might mean. But now everything felt different. I drafted a response. Dear North Bay team, I'm ready to discuss licensing options for my diagnostic assay. Are you still interested? The reply came back in 45 minutes. Absolutely. When can we meet? We set up a video call for the following Monday. I spent the weekend preparing a proper presentation, not the stolen version my daughters had made, but something better. Something true. The North Bay team appeared on my screen looking professional but warm. Their lead scientist was a woman named Dr. Helen Frost who actually understood my methodology. This could help so many people, she said, studying my data. We'd be honored to work with you. For the first time in weeks, I felt hope instead of betrayal. This was how it was supposed to work. We negotiated for 3 weeks. Everything happened in clear writing, with every term transparent. No hidden fees. No surprise clauses. Just honest conversation about what my research was worth and how it would be used. The final offer landed on my desk on a Tuesday, $3.2 million upfront, plus milestone payments tied to clinical trial success, plus royalty percentages that actually respected my contribution. I sat in my garage, staring at the number. $3.2 million. My daughters had tried to settle for $500,000. But there was something else I wanted, something that mattered more than money. I have one additional condition, I told Dr. Frost on our next call. I want to establish a scholarship endowment for women entering bioinnovation, especially women from complicated families who need support. She smiled. We can absolutely make that happen. And I want it named for my daughters, I added. Valerie and Danica. The silence on the call was surprised. Are you sure? I'm sure, I said. They need to learn what real legacy looks like. The contract got updated. We scheduled a signing date. And I went to bed that night feeling something close to peace. The signing happened in North Bay's downtown conference room. Everything was glass and clean lines and coffee that actually tasted good. I wore my lab shoes. Old, scuffed sneakers I'd worn for years of experiments. They felt like good luck. Dr. Frost walked me through every page, explaining clauses I didn't understand, making sure I was comfortable. The company's lawyer was patient and kind. Nobody rushed me. I signed my name 12 times. Each signature felt like permission. Permission to let go, permission to trust, permission to believe my work mattered. We shook hands. Someone brought in champagne, but I asked for tea instead. They laughed and brought me tea. My phone pinged with a wire transfer confirmation. The number looked impossible. All those zeros in my bank account where they'd never been before. I excused myself to the bathroom and cried for 5 minutes. Not sad tears. Something else. Relief, maybe. Or grief for all the years I'd worked alone, thinking nobody would ever care. When I came out, everyone pretended not to notice my red eyes. We took a photo for the company newsletter. I went home and made soup because that's what I did when the world felt too big. 2 days later, a certified letter arrived. My hands shook as I opened it. It was a legal petition questioning my mental competency to manage my assets. The filing referenced my fall on the back steps, my age, my isolated lifestyle, and suggested possible undue influence in my recent business decisions. My daughters' names were on it. I sat down hard on my couch. They were actually doing this. After everything, they were trying to have me declared incompetent so they could control my money. I called Molly immediately. Her voice was calm but firm. We expected this. Do you have documentation of your decision-making process? I have everything, I said.
Videos. Notes.
Medical records.
Good, she said.
Then we fight back. That afternoon, I called my primary doctor, Dr. Spencer Liu. He'd known me for 15 years. I need you to write a letter, I told him, confirming that I'm completely mentally competent. Of course you are, he said, sounding offended. Anyone would suggest otherwise. I'll have it ready tomorrow. I hung up and looked around my house, my organized kitchen, my functioning laboratory, my careful records. Everything proved I was fine. More than fine. They weren't going to win this. Molly and I spent the next week building our defense. We compiled medical records showing my perfect cognitive function. We pulled up my lab notebooks proving consistent, rational thinking. We exported time-stamped videos I'd made explaining my research methodology. But the most damaging evidence came from somewhere unexpected, the text messages between my daughters. I'd backed up my phone months ago, including a thread I'd barely noticed at the time. Now, reading it carefully, I saw everything. Messages where Valerie coached Danica. Keep mom off email for another week. Discussions about how to time the Pinecrest deal before she notices. Plans for splitting the finder's fee. Molly read them and nodded slowly. This shows premeditation. They knew exactly what they were doing. We filed our response to the competency petition, including every piece of evidence. My doctor's letter. My research documentation. My business correspondence with North Bay showing clear, rational negotiation. And yes, the text messages. All of them. Evidence doesn't need to shout, Molly told me. It just needs to exist. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out. I marked it on my calendar and went back to work in my lab. I had a new project starting, refining the assay for broader applications. Life kept moving forward, even when my family was trying to pull me backward. 1 week before the hearing, something worse happened. I was scrolling through a niche medical research forum when I saw it, a partial protocol describing my exact methodology, stripped of context and posted anonymously. My heart stopped. Someone had leaked part of my research. It wasn't enough to compromise the patent completely, but it could muddy the waters. Other researchers might see it and start working on similar approaches. Companies might argue my work wasn't as unique as I claimed. I screenshotted everything and sent it to Molly. Then I did something I'd planned for months ago. I ran my digital watermark tracer. I'd embedded hidden metadata in every file copy I'd shared, unique identifiers that would tell me exactly which version of my research this came from. It was like fingerprinting documents. The trace results came back in 10 minutes. The leaked protocol matched a file that had been accessed from Danica's laptop, specifically a version that had been on her boyfriend's computer. I'd never met Tyler, Danica's boyfriend. But apparently, he thought leaking medical research would make him look valuable to some startup he wanted to impress. I didn't call the police. I called North Bay's intellectual property investigator. Some battles needed professionals. The IP investigator was a quiet man named Warren Tish who worked with forensic precision. He tracked the forum post back to an IP address, cross-referenced it with Tyler's social media activity, and had enough evidence for a formal interview within 48 hours. Tyler folded immediately. According to Warren's report, Tyler had grabbed the file from Danica's laptop thinking it was just some medical notes. He posted it to look smart, to show some startup founder he had access to cutting-edge research. He gave a written statement admitting everything. The forum post came down within hours, flagged for copyright violation. But the damage to my daughter's case was already done. Danica had given her boyfriend access to confidential research material, which proved she didn't understand the value or sensitivity of what she'd been trying to sell. Molly added Tyler's statement to our evidence file. "This keeps getting easier," she said, though she didn't sound happy about it. I wasn't happy either. I wanted to feel victorious, but mostly I just felt tired. My family was destroying itself, and I was stuck documenting every piece of the wreckage. The hearing was in 5 days. I made soup and tried not to think about what came next. 3 days before the hearing, something unexpected arrived, an affidavit from Todd Brennan, Pinecrest Clinic's general counsel. He detailed the entire dinner meeting, how my daughters had approached his company, how they'd presented my research as their own project, how I'd exposed the stolen data with my planted error. Ms. Kane demonstrated clear, strategic thinking and full control of her intellectual property, he wrote. Any suggestion of mental incompetency is contradicted by her sophisticated planning and execution. He didn't have to write that letter. Pinecrest was already out of the situation. But he did it anyway because apparently some lawyers still believed in doing the right thing. Molly called me after reading it. "This is the nail in the coffin of their petition. No judge will question your competency with this kind of evidence." I thanked her and hung up, staring at the affidavit. A stranger had stood up for me more firmly than my own children had. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about how I'd raised Valerie and Danica, the values I'd tried to teach them, the love I'd poured into their lives. Where had it all gone wrong? Or maybe it hadn't gone wrong. Maybe this was just growing pains, and we'd all survive it somehow. 2 days before the hearing, my bank called. They'd flagged a suspicious business filing. Someone had tried to register a new LLC with a name almost identical to mine. Kane Diagnostics instead of Kane Diagnostics. One letter different. Molly was immediately suspicious. That's trademark infringement. Who filed it? The bank couldn't tell us directly, but they forwarded the paperwork to Molly's office. The names on the filing were Valerie Sullivan and Danica Brenner, my daughter's married names. They were still trying. Even after everything, they were still trying to work around me. I stared at the email, feeling something break inside my chest. Not anger anymore. Something sadder and deeper. This was my family. These were the babies I'd rocked to sleep, the children I'd taught to read, the young women I'd been proud to raise. And they couldn't stop trying to take from me. I forwarded the filing to Molly without comment. She handled the cease and desist letter. The fake LLC got dissolved before it ever opened a bank account. But I made a decision that night. I would not turn my family into a public scandal. I would not destroy my daughters in court. I would simply teach them what they should have learned years ago, that love has boundaries. The night before the hearing, I did something my daughters wouldn't expect. I put a copy of the North Bay licensing agreement into a plain brown paper grocery bag, the kind I used to pack their school lunches decades ago. I called them both and asked them to come over.
No lawyers. No recordings.
Just us. They sat at my kitchen table looking nervous and angry and ashamed all at once. That particular expression is what grief looks like when it doesn't have the right words yet. I placed the grocery bag between us and pulled out the licensing agreement. I turned to the page showing the numbers. "You tried to sell my research for $500,000, I said quietly. "I licensed it properly for $3.2 million. Their faces went through several emotions: shock, disbelief, something that might have been respect. "Here's the difference," I continued. "Consent. You tried to take something that wasn't yours. I chose to share something that was mine. That's why the number is different." Then I pulled out the scholarship endowment paperwork, the fund bearing their names, designed to help other women who needed support. "This is what legacy actually looks like," I said. The competency hearing got canceled. My daughters withdrew their petition the morning it was scheduled, after Molly sent them copies of all our evidence. But I still restructured my estate, just to be clear. Everything went into a spendthrift trust with conditions. No lump sum payments, only annual distributions tied to completing a financial literacy course and volunteering 200 hours each year at the hospital research library. They could choose pride, or they could choose progress. Not both. Molly looked over the trust documents and nodded approval. You're being more generous than I would be.
They're still my daughters, I said.
I'm just teaching them differently now. The first scholarship checks went out that month. A young woman named Carrie sent me a thank you email that made me cry. She was the first in her family to pursue medical research, and the money meant she could afford graduate school. In my garage lab, I started training 2 new volunteer interns from the local community college. They were brilliant and hungry to learn, asking questions I hadn't heard in years. My daughters sent careful, formal emails now. Polite, distant. We were rebuilding from scratch, and it would take time. But I was good at long experiments. Patience was something I'd learned in that garage over 14 years of trial and error. Today, 6 months after everything fell apart, I'm standing in my laboratory watching a centrifuge spin. My phone buzzes with a message from North Bay. The first clinical trial results are promising. The assay works even better than we hoped. The scholarship fund sent its second round of acceptance letters yesterday. For more women getting chances they wouldn't have had. Their names are posted on the fund's website, right under the title, the Valerie and Danica Kane Memorial Scholarship. My daughters haven't commented on that yet. But Valerie sent me a photo last week, her completion certificate from the financial literacy course. She looked tired but proud. Danica started her volunteer hours at the hospital library. The coordinator called to tell me she's been helping organize old research archives and doing good work. We're not healed. We might never be. But we're moving forward, which is something. I betrayed my work once by not protecting it sooner. My daughters betrayed me by trying to steal it. We all learned expensive lessons. But I didn't win by destroying them. I won by refusing to destroy myself, by insisting that my work, my boundaries, and my choices mattered. In my laboratory, a timer beeps. Another test complete. Another step forward. The science doesn't care about family drama. It just keeps working, patient and true. And so do I.